Hey guys, welcome to RedSunStories. Hope you're doing well. Tonight, discover what happens when a man who spent his life perfecting the art of playing a ghost becomes one, and uses death itself to deliver the performance of eternity. So before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments what time it is for you. I would love to connect with you guys. Now, let's dive into tonight's story together. Sakura woke in darkness to the warmth of another body. His wife Otsuka lay to his right, breathing softly in the late autumn night. But between them, pressed against his back, was a third presence. Cold, wet, smelling of swamp water and decay. The kind of smell that clings to corpses left too long in stagnant pools. He leaped from the futon with a strangled cry, heart hammering against his ribs. The paper lantern flickered to life in his trembling hands, casting wild shadows across the room. There was only Otsuka, confused and alone in the bedding, raising herself on one elbow. No third figure, no water stains on the cotton sheets. Yet the smell lingered in his nostrils. That particular rot of a drowned man mixed with something else. Stage makeup, old wood and paint, the backstage smell of Morita Za Theater. Half a year had passed since they'd drowned Koheiji in a Saka swamp. Half a year since they'd taken his money, his house, his life. Sakura had almost convinced himself the corpse at the hideout was fever dream, exhaustion, guilt playing tricks. But now, standing in the room that once belonged to the man he'd murdered, he understood something terrible. Koheiji's performance was not yet finished. What happens when a man who perfected playing ghosts becomes one? In Edo's grand theatrical world of the early 1700s, during the golden age of the great Ichikawa Danjuro II, there lived an actor named Kohada Koheiji who answered that question in the most terrible way imaginable. This is his story, a tale of dedication so complete it transcended death itself, of betrayal so deep it demanded supernatural justice, of 5 golden coins that poisoned everyone who touched them. But to understand the ghost, you must first understand the man. And to understand the man, you must understand just how desperately he wanted to be good at something, anything, in the merciless theater world of Edo, Japan. Kohada Koheiji was cursed from birth with an unfortunate appearance. Pale, languid skin stretched tight over sharp bones. Sunken eyes that seemed perpetually flat and lifeless, as if all emotion had been drained from them. Hair that hung disheveled no matter how carefully he arranged it. In an art form where beauty and presence meant everything, where actors were revered as living gods and their faces adorned ukiyo-e prints across the city, Koheiji looked like death itself had taken human form. He joined the Morita Za theater troupe as a young man, filled with dreams of glory on the kabuki stage. But dreams meant nothing without the face to match them. His manager, a kind man who saw determination in those flat eyes, resorted to bribing other troupes and begging countryside theaters just to find Koheiji even the smallest roles. Background roles, non-speaking parts. The man who gets killed in the first act and lies motionless for the rest of the performance. Year after year, Koheiji watched other actors rise while he remained a third-rate performer, barely scraping together enough coin to survive. He would stand in the wings, watching the great Ichikawa Danjuro II command the stage with superhuman presence, and wonder if he would ever feel what it was like to have an audience truly see him. Then came his one chance. A traveling countryside show needed someone to play a ghost. The role paid almost nothing. The theater was so small and poor they couldn't afford elaborate makeup or costumes. They specifically wanted someone who looked naturally unpleasant, someone whose appearance would save them money on cosmetics. Koheiji's manager brought him the offer with apologetic eyes, as if this final humiliation might break the young actor's spirit entirely. Instead, Koheiji's flat eyes lit with something close to joy. "I'll take it," he said, "and I'll make them remember it." What he did next would change everything and doom him. Koheiji knew this was his last opportunity. If he failed at playing a ghost in some forgotten countryside theater, there would be nothing left. No more chances. No more dreams. Just a life of poverty and obscurity. A footnote in theater history if he was remembered at all. So he studied death with the dedication of a master craftsman perfecting his art. He began visiting temples at night, observing the bodies of the recently deceased during funeral preparations. The priests found this strange but allowed it. After all, an actor must understand what he portrays. Koheiji would kneel beside corpses for hours, taking notes by candlelight. He studied how muscles fell limp after death, how skin took on a particular waxy quality, how eyes stared with terrible blankness into nothing. He visited execution grounds, watching from a distance as criminals met their ends, memorizing the exact moment when life left the body and something else remained, that empty shell, that absence of spirit. He practiced falling as corpses fell, with no attempt to break the impact, landing with the heavy thud of dead weight. In his tiny room above a noodle shop, he would stand before a cracked mirror for hours, practicing the transformation. He learned to let all expression drain from his face, to make his eyes stare with that particular flat emptiness of death. He practiced moving with eerie gracefulness, as if his joints no longer quite obeyed natural laws. He developed a voice that rattled in his throat like water through reeds, like the last breath leaving drowned lungs. His landlady, hearing these strange sounds through the floor, began to avoid him. Neighbors whispered that Koheiji had gone mad, that he was becoming the thing he studied. But Koheiji didn't care. For the first time in his failed career, he felt like he was good at something. His naturally unfortunate appearance, that curse that had doomed him in every other role, suddenly became his greatest asset. He didn't need expensive makeup to look like death. He simply needed to perfect the performance of being dead. When he finally traveled to Osaka for the countryside show, Koheiji was ready. The theater was indeed small and shabby, the audience mostly farmers and merchants who had never seen the grand stages of Edo. But on that first night, when Koheiji stepped onto the stage as a ghost, something remarkable happened. The audience gasped, then fell into perfect, terrible silence. He didn't move like an actor playing a ghost. He moved like a ghost playing at being seen by the living. Every gesture was precise, haunting, inevitable. When he spoke, his voice made children clutch their mothers. When he stared with those flat, dead eyes, hardened men looked away. The performance was so convincing, so thoroughly unsettling, that several people in the audience fled. Others sat frozen, unable to look away. When the scene ended and Koheiji exited the stage, the silence continued for several heartbeats before exploding into thunderous applause. Word spread quickly through the countryside. The actor who looked like death, the ghost who seemed real. People traveled from neighboring villages to see Koheiji's performance, whispering that they'd witnessed something beyond mere acting. The theater, accustomed to sparse crowds, suddenly found itself packed every night. The local magistrate himself attended, sitting in the place of honor. After the performance, he summoned Koheiji and presented him with 5 golden ryo, a fortune, more money than Koheiji had earned in his entire career combined. "I have seen the great stages of Edo," the magistrate said. and I have never witnessed anything so perfectly executed. You do not play a ghost. You are one. For the first time in his life, Kohada Koheiji was acclaimed, successful, good at something. He clutched those 5 golden coins in his sleeve and felt something like happiness. He would return to Edo with this money, with these stories of his success. He would tell his wife Otsuka how he had finally made something of himself. Perhaps she would look at him with pride instead of embarrassment. Perhaps she would love him the way he loved her. He didn't know that while he succeeded in Osaka, his house in Edo had become the setting for a different kind of performance, one of betrayal, lust, and plotting murder. Otsuka had married Koheiji out of necessity, not love. She was the widow of Ikushima Hanroku, an actor who had been executed years earlier for the unthinkable crime of killing Ichikawa Danjuro Barn on stage during a performance. The scandal had destroyed her life, left her destitute and unmarriageable. Koheiji, lonely and desperate for companionship, had offered marriage. She had accepted, viewing it as survival rather than romance. From the beginning, she was embarrassed by him, by his unfortunate appearance, his failed career, his eager devotion to her. She endured his affection with barely concealed contempt, dreaming of something better, someone better. That someone arrived in the form of Adachi Sakuro, a taiko drum player at the Morita-za Theater. Sakuro was everything Koheiji was not. Handsome, confident, successful in his craft. Where Koheiji's love was desperate and grateful, Sakuro's attention was casual and commanding. When he looked at Otsuka, he saw not a widow trying to survive, but a beautiful woman trapped in an unfortunate marriage. Their affair began shortly after Koheiji left for his countryside tour. Sakuro would arrive at Koheiji's house after dark, slipping through the back entrance. But as weeks passed and Koheiji remained away, they grew bolder. Sakuro began staying entire nights, sleeping in Koheiji's bed, eating Koheiji's food, living as if he were the master of the house. Neighbors noticed but said nothing. This was Edo, where everyone had secrets and survival meant minding one's own affairs. But Otsuka grew restless. The longer Koheiji remained away, the more she and Sakuro talked of a future together. A real marriage, not this shame of being tied to a failed actor who looked like a corpse. Then word reached Edo of Koheiji's success in Osaka, how he had become the talk of the countryside, acclaimed for his ghost performance, rewarded by the magistrate with golden coins. Otsuka heard this news with mixed feelings. Pride that her husband had finally achieved something, but also dread at what his return would mean. Sakuro heard it with calculation in his eyes. "He'll come back with money," Sakuro said one night as they lay together in what would soon be Koheiji's bed again. Golden Rio from the magistrate. Maybe enough to quit theater, to establish himself as something more. Maybe enough to keep you comfortable while still looking like death warmed over. Otsuka said nothing, but her silence was answer enough. "Unless," Sakuro continued, his voice dropping to something intimate and dangerous. "Unless he doesn't come back at all. Unless his final performance ends tragically. A drowning, perhaps. A terrible accident in some rural swamp. These things happen to traveling actors. The roads are dangerous. Bodies are often never recovered." He turned to face her in the darkness, his hand finding hers. 5 golden Rio, this house. Freedom to be together without shame or secrecy. All it requires is one unfortunate accident. Otsuka should have been horrified. Should have thrown him out, warned Koheiji, chosen loyalty over desire. Instead, she squeezed his hand and whispered, "Get rid of him. Let us be together forever without this burden. Neither of them considered that the burden might become far heavier than a living husband, that the man they planned to murder had spent months studying death so thoroughly he had learned how to transcend it, that 5 golden coins could carry a curse far worse than poverty. Sakuro left for Osaka the next morning, telling colleagues at Moritaza that he wanted to see his friend Koheiji's acclaimed performance. Everyone thought it touching. 2 theater men supporting each other, one successful, one still learning his craft. No one suspected he carried murder in his traveling bundle. Sakuro arrived in Osaka on a humid summer evening, the air thick with the promise of rain. The countryside theater was easy to find. Just follow the crowds toward the largest building, listen for the sound of anticipation and excited voices. He purchased a ticket and watched his future victim's performance with something approaching professional appreciation. Koheiji truly was remarkable as a ghost. Sakuro, who knew theater, could see the dedication in every movement, every gesture, the way Koheiji had somehow mastered the art of looking dead while moving. It was unsettling even to someone who knew it was performance. For a moment, Sakuro felt something close to regret. Then he thought of Otsuka, waiting in Edo, of the 5 golden ryo in Koheiji's sleeve, of the life they could build on the foundation of this unfortunate man's death. Regret dissolved like morning mist. After the performance, Sakuro waited by the backstage entrance, calling out joyfully when Koheiji emerged. "Brother Koheiji, your old friend from Moritaza. I heard tales of your success and had to see it myself." Koheiji's flat eyes lit with genuine joy. He had so few friends in the theater world, and here was Sakuro traveling all this way to witness his triumph. They embraced, and Koheiji insisted on buying sake, on sharing the details of his breakthrough. Sakuro played his part perfectly, the supportive colleague, the admiring friend, asking to see the golden ryo, exclaiming over their weight and shine. "The magistrate himself gave them to you. Brother Koheiji, you finally found your calling. You were always meant to play ghosts. You have the dedication for it." Over the next few days, Sakuro integrated himself into Koheiji's routine. He brought his taiko drums and played during performances, adding percussion to Koheiji's ghostly appearances. The audiences loved it. The supernatural was enhanced by rhythmic thunder. Koheiji was grateful, unaware that Sakuro was establishing alibi and friendship, making their connection visible to dozens of witnesses. Sakuro's brother Unpei, a bandit living in the rural areas around Osaka, arrived quietly. The 3 of them met in a shabby inn, Koheiji unaware that he was dining with his murderers. They shared food and drink, laughing, making plans. Unpei suggested fishing in a Osaka swamp when the next rain canceled performances. The fish were fat and plentiful, he said. Perfect way to spend a free day. Koheiji agreed eagerly, touching those 5 golden coins in his sleeve, imagining the look on Otsuka's face when he returned home successful and wealthy. Imagining, perhaps, that she might finally look at him with something like love. The rain came 3 days later, heavy and persistent. The theater manager canceled that evening's performance. No one would venture out in such weather. Unpei arrived at Nai, Koheiji's boarding house with fishing poles and a wide smile. "Perfect weather for fishing, brother. The fish swim close to surface in the rain." Sakuro declined to join them, claiming stomach troubles. "You 2 go ahead. I'll rest and be ready to play drums tomorrow night." He needed to be seen staying behind, establishing that he was not present at the swamp when the unfortunate accident occurred. Koheiji and Unpei walked through the rain to Osaka swamp, a sprawling body of murky water surrounded by reeds and bent trees. The water was dark as ink, disturbed by raindrops that created endless ripples. They found a relatively dry spot beneath overhanging branches and cast their lines. For perhaps an hour, they actually fished. Koheiji caught nothing but enjoyed the companionship, the peaceful sound of rain on water. He talked about returning to Edo, about showing Otsuka the money, about finally being someone she could be proud of. Then Unpei struck him across the back of the head with his fishing pole. A sudden, vicious blow that sent Koheiji tumbling forward into the black water. Koheiji surfaced, gasping, confused, water filling his mouth. Unpei dropped the pole and waded in, hands finding Koheiji's head, pushing down. Koheiji thrashed, his arms flailing, but Unpei was stronger, and the swamp bottom was slippery mud that offered no purchase. Water entered Koheiji's lungs in burning rushes. His flat eyes went wide, then wider as he understood what was happening. Betrayal, murder, death in a rural swamp while the rain erased all evidence. His last thought, as consciousness fled, was of Otsuka. And perhaps, in that final moment, he understood that too. What she had become. What she had done. Unpei held Koheiji's head underwater for a long time after the struggling stopped, making certain. Then he searched the body, finding the 5 golden ryo carefully wrapped in silk within Koheiji's sleeve. He pocketed the coins. These would be his payment for the deed, and let the corpse sink to the swamp bottom, where mud and darkness would conceal it. By the time Unpei walked back to town, the rain had washed away all traces. A shame, he told people who asked. His friend Koheiji had wanted to fish, but Unpei had convinced him the weather was too dangerous. Probably for the best. Such things could be treacherous. That night, Sakuro told the theater manager that Koheiji had fallen ill and was resting at his boarding house. Best to cancel tomorrow's performance as well. Give the actor time to recover. The manager agreed, disappointed but understanding. These traveling shows were always uncertain. Unpei returned to his hideout in the rural hills, a small house hidden among trees where he conducted his bandit business away from official eyes. He was wet and tired but satisfied. 5 golden ryo for a few moments' work. He dried himself, changed clothes, and prepared to split the money with Sakuro. He opened the door to his back room and found Kohada Koheiji sitting there. The corpse was waterlogged, clothes dripping onto the floor, skin pale blue-gray in the lamplight. Mud clung to its face and hair, but it was unmistakably Koheiji. Those flat eyes, that unfortunate appearance, now made truly deathlike by drowning. Unpei stood frozen in the doorway, rational mind insisting this was impossible while his eyes saw the truth. He had held this man underwater until no bubbles rose, had felt the life leave him, had left the body at the bottom of Asaka swamp. Yet, here it sat, water pooling around it, head tilted at an angle that suggested the neck might be broken. Watching him, with flat, dead eyes that didn't blink. Unpei's shout brought Sakuro running from the front room where he'd been waiting. Together they stared at the impossible sight, the corpse that should have been underwater, hidden, irretrievable. "The coins," Sakuro whispered. "Check if he has the coins." Unpei approached cautiously, trembling. The corpse didn't move, didn't react. It simply sat there, dripping. Unpei reached out and pulled back Koheiji's sleeve to check for the golden ryo. The corpse's hand shot out and grabbed Unpei's wrist. The grip was iron. The fingers were ice. Unpei screamed, trying to pull free, but the dead hand held him with impossible strength. Then slowly, terribly, the corpse's eyes opened fully, no longer flat and lifeless but burning with recognition and rage. Those eyes locked on Sakuro, and in that stare was such perfect hatred, such complete understanding of betrayal, that Sakuro felt his bladder release in pure terror. The corpse's mouth opened, water spilling out, and it made a sound, not quite words, not quite laughter, but something between them. The rattling of drowned lungs attempting speech, the sound of a performance that had transcended its performer. Unpei was still screaming, still trying to break free. Sakuro grabbed an axe from the wall and brought it down on Koheiji's neck, severing the head with a wet crunch. The head rolled away, but the hand continued to grip Unpei's wrist. Sakuro had to cut through each finger individually, sawing through bone and ligament before the hand finally released. Even then, as the severed fingers lay scattered on the floor, they seemed to curl and uncurl slightly, as if trying to grab again. Both men fled into the night, leaving everything behind. Sakuro ran for Edo, his mind shattered by what he'd witnessed. Behind them, in the hideout, the severed head and fingers lay in pools of water and blood. And if anyone had stayed to watch, they might have seen the fingers slowly rot, releasing the particular stench of death that would haunt Sakuro for the rest of his short, terrible life. Sakuro arrived at Koheiji's house in Edo 3 days later, hollow-eyed and shaking. He had not slept since the hideout, terrified that closing his eyes would bring back that image, the waterlogged corpse opening its eyes, the recognition in them, the impossible strength of dead hands. Otsuka met him at the door, expecting triumph and money. Instead, she found a man on the edge of madness, stammering about corpses and murder gone wrong. She pulled him inside quickly before neighbors could see, and listened to his confession. Everything. The murder in the swamp, the corpse appearing at the hideout, the severed fingers that wouldn't stop moving, the 5 golden ryo that had disappeared with Unpei, who had fled into the countryside and vanished. To Sakuro's amazement, Otsuka listened calmly. When he finished, she poured tea with steady hands and said simply, "Koheiji just got home. He's resting in the back room." Sakuro dropped his cup, tea spilling across the floor. "What did you say?" "He's home. Arrived this afternoon, tired from traveling. He went to rest and hasn't come out." Her voice was utterly composed, as if discussing nothing more unusual than a husband returning from work. "You should greet him, Sakuro. You were such good friends." Sakuro stood on trembling legs and walked toward the back room where he and Otsuka had shared so many secret nights. The room that had belonged to Koheiji, that still belonged to Koheiji, that would always belong to Koheiji, no matter who else tried to claim it. The door was closed. Paper screens filtered weak afternoon light into shadows. Sakuro's hand hesitated on the frame, then slowly pulled the door open. The room was empty. Futon neatly arranged, everything in its place. No waterlogged corpse, no evidence of anyone resting there. Relief washed through Sakuro so powerfully he nearly collapsed. Madness, guilt playing tricks, Otsuka mocking him, or perhaps testing whether he had actually gone through with the murder. He turned to call back to her, to demand explanation. Then he saw the folding screen in the corner shift slightly. A pale blue-tinged hand reached around its edge, not moving naturally, but with that eerie gracefulness Koheiji had perfected in his ghost performances. The fingers were swollen with water, skin pruned and wrinkled from prolonged submersion. Sakuro grabbed the screen and pulled it away violently. 5 severed fingers lay on the floor behind it, arranged in a neat row. As Sakuro watched in horror, they began to curl and uncurl, moving independently like dying spiders. Then they started to rot. The flesh blackened and peeled, releasing that unmistakable smell of death and swamp water. Within moments, they were nothing but bone and putrefaction, the stench filling the room so completely that Sakuro gagged and stumbled backward. A tiny blue flame, no larger than a firefly, floated up from the rotting fingers. It danced in the air for a moment, then flew past Sakuro's face and out through the window, vanishing into the evening sky. Behind him, Otsuka's voice remained calm. So he really is dead then. Good. We can arrange the funeral and finally be free of this burden. But Sakuro knew better. The performance had not ended. It had only just begun. They arranged a funeral quickly, a simple affair at a temple on the outskirts of Edo. The priest who performed the rites noted that there was no body, but accepted their story of a drowning in distant Osaka, body irretrievable from swamp bottom. These things happened. The priest took his payment and chanted prayers for Koheiji's spirit to find peace in the next world. Sakuro and Otsuka waited the traditional mourning period, then married quietly. They moved into Koheiji's house permanently, now their house, built on his death and their betrayal. Sakuro brought his taiko drums and his few possessions. Otsuka rearranged the rooms, erasing traces of her first husband, making everything clean and new. The 5 golden ryo were gone, vanished with Unpei, who had fled to some distant province and would never be found. But Sakuro still earned decent money as a drum player at Morita-za, and Otsuka was frugal. They would manage. They would build a life on this foundation of murder and deceit, and perhaps in time, they would even forget the cost. For half a year, it seemed they might succeed. The house remained quiet. No more rotting fingers, no more waterlogged apparitions. Sakuro's nightmares faded. His hands stopped shaking when he played drums in theater performances. Otsuka resumed normal life, shopping at markets, gossiping with neighbors, acting the part of a woman happily married to her second husband after unfortunate loss of the first. Neither of them spoke about Koheiji. His name became forbidden, unmentioned, as if silence could erase him from existence as thoroughly as drowning had erased him from life. But in Edo, during the era of Great Kabuki, there was a saying, "The best performances are the ones that continue long after the curtain falls." And Kohada Koheiji, who had spent his life perfecting the art of being a ghost, was about to deliver the performance of his death. The first sign came on a cold autumn night, half a year to the day after Koheiji's murder. Sakuro woke to the sensation he had felt once before, that terrible awareness of a third presence in the bed, the same cold, wet feeling against his back, the same smell of swamp water and decay, mixed now with something else. Stage makeup, old theater wood, the particular scent of incense used in funeral rites. He sat up sharply, gasping. Otsuka stirred beside him, half awake. "What's wrong?" There was... Sakuro turned to look at the space between them. Nothing. Just rumpled bedding. 2 people alone. Nothing. A dream. But the smell lingered. And when he lay back down, he couldn't shake the feeling that if he turned his back, there would be someone there. Watching. Waiting. Performing the role of patient revenge. The next night, the same sensation. And the night after that, Sakuro began sleeping fitfully, jolting awake at the slightest sound. The house, which had been quiet for months, now seemed full of small noises, creaking boards, sliding doors, the whisper of fabric against wood, the sounds of someone moving through rooms in the darkness. Otsuka noticed his deterioration. "You're imagining things. Guilt over what we did, perhaps. But he's dead, Sakuro. Dead and buried. We performed the funeral rites. He's gone." "Is he?" Sakura stared at her with hollow eyes. "Because I keep feeling him, between us, cold and wet, every night now. Every single night he's there." Otsuka's calm began to crack. "That's madness. There's nothing there." "Then why do you flinch when you pass the back room? Why do you avoid looking at the corner where those fingers rotted? Why do you burn incense constantly, as if trying to cover up some smell?" They didn't speak after that, but both began watching the house with nervous attention, waiting for something to happen, waiting for the performance to resume. A week later, Sakura woke to find Otsuka sitting up in bed, staring at the window. "There's someone outside," she whispered. "I saw a shadow pass." Sakura lit a lantern and checked. Nothing but empty garden, autumn wind moving through bare branches. But when he returned to bed, they both saw it. A figure at the window, pale and wet, pressed against the paper screen from outside. The silhouette of a man with disheveled hair and a tilted head, as if his neck were broken. The figure didn't move, didn't try to enter. Simply stood there, watching. Then slowly, it sank downward, as if descending into earth or water, until it vanished completely. Sakura and Otsuka sat awake until dawn, clutching each other, the lantern burning uselessly between them. The hauntings escalated. Every night now, the figure would appear, sometimes at the window, sometimes in the garden, once standing in the hallway outside their room, visible through the crack beneath the door as a shadow that dripped water onto wooden floors. Sakura began drinking heavily, trying to numb himself to terror. He would arrive at theater rehearsals drunk, missing drum cues, fumbling rhythms he'd played perfectly for years. His colleagues whispered concerns. His reputation began to suffer. Otsuka grew paranoid about Sakura's fidelity. The feeling of that third presence in their bed had infected her mind with suspicion. If someone could be there unseen, unfelt by her, what else might be happening? Late one night, drunk and paranoid himself, Sakura accused her of taking lovers during the day while he worked. She struck him across the face, screaming that she had given up everything for him, including her soul. Their marriage, built on betrayal, began devouring itself with mistrust and fear. Neither could admit that what haunted them wasn't guilt or paranoia, but the actual ghost of the man they'd murdered. Admitting that would mean admitting they were powerless, that Koheiji's revenge had only just begun. Then came the night that shattered what remained of their sanity. Sakura woke to the now familiar sensation of cold wetness. But this time, it was different, more substantial, more real. The weight and presence of an actual body between him and Otsuka, taking up space in the physical world. He didn't cry out this time. He simply lay there, frozen, feeling the cold press of dead flesh against his back. Beside him, Otsuka's breathing changed. She felt it too. For a long moment, neither moved. The house held its breath around them. Then slowly, Sakura reached for the lantern, his hand shaking so badly he nearly knocked it over. Light flared. He turned his head. Nothing between them but empty bedding. Again, always nothing when he looked, yet the sensation remained impossible to dismiss. Rage suddenly replaced fear. Rage at being tormented for months. Rage at this violation of his home and sanity. Rage at the dead refusing to stay dead. Sakura leaped from the futon and screamed at the empty air. "Show yourself. If you're here, if you're real, stop hiding like a coward. Face me." A sound from the garden answered him. Soft, wet footsteps on stone paths. Growing closer. Sakura grabbed his wakizashi short sword from its stand, hands fumbling with the scabbard. Otsuka sat up, eyes wide, watching the window. The footsteps continued, steady and unhurried. up the wooden steps to the Engawa veranda, stopping just outside the door. The door slid open. A pale figure stood silhouetted in darkness. Not quite solid, not quite transparent, something between, like moonlight given shape. The figure of a man with flat, dead eyes and disheveled hair, wearing the clothes he'd died in, waterlogged and dripping. One hand reached toward them, fingers curled in a gesture that might be beckoning or accusation. Sakuro screamed and charged with the wakizashi raised, blind with terror and rage. He crossed the room in 2 strides and brought the blade down in a wild slash. The figure vanished like mist. The blade struck nothing but air, and momentum carried Sakuro stumbling onto the veranda, nearly falling into the garden. Behind him, Otsuka shrieked. He spun around and saw her standing on the futon, one hand raised defensively. In the moonlight streaming through the window, another figure had appeared, this one inside the room, reaching for her. Sakuro rushed back, slashing wildly. His blade connected with something solid. He felt resistance, heard a wet sound of impact. Otsuka's scream turned from fear to agony. The figure vanished. Sakuro stood panting, wakizashi dripping. Otsuka had collapsed onto the futon, clutching her hand. Blood poured between her fingers, dark and profuse. "What did you do?" she gasped. "Sakuro, what did you do?" He pulled her hand away and felt his stomach turn. All 5 fingers had been severed. Clean cuts through bone and tendon, just like the corpse's fingers at Unpei's hideout. The fingers lay scattered on the futon, already beginning to rot with that familiar stench of death and swamp water. From somewhere above them, from the ceiling rafters, from the air itself, came a sound. Laughter. That same rattling, water-choked laughter they had heard at the hideout. The laughter of drowned lungs attempting joy. The laughter of a ghost, perfecting its performance. Otsuka fainted from pain and shock. Sakuro wrapped her mutilated hand, the blood soaking through layer after layer of cloth. He collected the severed fingers with shaking hands, not knowing what else to do with them, watching as they blackened and decayed before his eyes. When he looked up, Koheiji stood in the corner of the room, fully visible now, no longer just shadow or mist. The ghost studied its own severed fingers on Otsuka's hand with what might have been satisfaction. Its flat, dead eyes met Sakuro's, and in them was terrible intelligence. This was not random haunting. This was deliberate, methodical. A performance carefully plotted and perfectly executed. "Why?" Sakuro whispered. "We had you buried properly. We paid for prayers. What more do you want?" The ghost's mouth moved, water spilling from its lips, but no words came out. Instead, it raised both hands, showing the stumps where its own fingers had been severed. Then it pointed at Sakuro, at Otsuka, at the room around them. Finally, it pointed at itself. The meaning was clear enough. This house is mine. This woman was mine. This life you stole was mine. And now I'm taking it all back, piece by piece, performance by performance, until you have nothing left but madness and death. The ghost faded as dawn approached, but its laughter continued to echo through the house long after it vanished. That rattling, waterlogged sound that would haunt their every sleeping and waking moment from this night forward. Otsuka never fully recovered from the shock. When she woke the next day, hand bandaged and infected, she could only stare at the wall and whisper, "He's here. He's still here. He'll always be here." And she was right. The ghost of Kohada Koheiji returned every night after that, without fail, without mercy, perfecting its craft the same way it had perfected playing a ghost in life, through dedication, repetition, and absolute commitment to the performance. Sometimes it appeared at the window, face pressed against paper screens, breath fogging the thin barrier between outside and inside. Sometimes in the garden, standing perfectly still among the winter bare plants, staring at the house with flat, dead eyes that never blinked. Sometimes it manifested inside, in corners and shadows behind sliding doors, always just at the edge of vision until suddenly it was there, fully present, waterlogged and rotting. But mostly it appeared in their bed. They would wake to find Koheiji lying between them, cold and wet, that terrible smell filling the room. His presence was undeniable now. Both felt it, both saw it. The weight of him depressed the futon. Water from his clothes soaked the bedding. When Sakuro tried to strike him, the ghost would simply fade, only to reappear moments later in a different position, as if the entire room was its stage and it could enter and exit from any direction. The ghost never spoke, never made violent moves. It simply appeared, watched them with those dead eyes full of recognition and judgment, and waited. Sometimes it would reach out one handless arm, showing the stumps where fingers had been severed. Sometimes it would smile, that terrible drowned smile with water running from its mouth. Otsuka's madness deepened rapidly. The infection in her hand worsened despite treatment, fever setting in. She would lie in bed raving, seeing Koheiji even when he wasn't there, confessing their sins to empty air. "I'm sorry," she would whisper. "I never loved you, but you didn't deserve this. I'm sorry. Please leave us. Please stop." The ghost never stopped. Sakuro tried everything. He hired priests to perform exorcism rites, but the ghost would appear behind them during ceremonies, and the priests would flee in terror. He burned incense constantly, filled the house with protective talismans, even tried moving to a different residence. But Koheiji followed them. After all, this wasn't about the house. It was about justice, about performance, about the man who had been good at one thing and was now demonstrating his mastery of it night after night after night. Neighbors began avoiding their street. The house acquired a reputation for being haunted, and property values in the area dropped. People walking past after dark would sometimes glimpse a pale figure in the windows, or hear that terrible, waterlogged laughter echoing through walls. Sakuro's career at Morita-za ended when he arrived at a performance too drunk to stand, then began screaming at empty air during rehearsal, swinging his drum mallets at a ghost only he could see. They dismissed him with pity and disgust. Without income, with Otsuka unable to function, with medical expenses mounting, they began selling their possessions. First, the valuable items, silk robes, ceramic dishes, decorative items, then necessities, extra futon, cooking utensils, furniture. Everything went piece by piece, consumed by the need to treat Otsuka's infection, to buy sake to numb the terror, to pay priests for useless prayers. Eventually, they spent the last of their money, the modest savings that remained from Sakuro's drum-playing career, the emergency funds they'd kept hidden. Irony of ironies, the amount totaled almost exactly 5 golden ryo, the same 5 coins they'd murdered to obtain, now gone to treating wounds inflicted by the ghost of their victim. Otsuka died 3 months after her fingers were severed. The infection had spread to her arm, then throughout her body. In her final days, she could only lie in fevered delirium, conversing with Koheiji as if he were her living husband, visiting from countryside tour. "Did you do well?" she would ask. "Were the audiences pleased? I'm so proud of you." The ghost stood by her deathbed every night, watching, no longer seeking revenge against her. She was already destroyed. simply witnessing the conclusion of this act of his performance. On her final night, Otsuka's eyes cleared briefly. She looked at Koheiji standing in the corner and whispered with perfect clarity, "You were better than I deserved. I'm sorry I never saw it." Then her eyes closed and her breathing stopped. The funeral was a pathetic affair. Sakuro, now penniless, could barely afford a priest's services. He stumbled through the ceremony in a daze, performing the role of grieving widower, while Koheiji's ghost stood among the few attendees, visible only to Sakuro. The ghost watched as they prepared Otsuka's body, watched as they laid her in the ground, watched as Sakuro finally walked away from the cemetery alone. If Sakuro thought his torment would end with Otsuka's death, he was mistaken. The nightly performances continued. Now they had a different character, no longer persecution of two conspirators, but the slow dismantling of one final life. With Otsuka dead and his savings exhausted, Sakuro had nothing left. No career, no money, no home. He'd been forced to abandon Koheiji's house when he could no longer pay rent to the landlord. He lived as a beggar on Edo's streets, sleeping in temple gardens and under bridges, eating scraps when he could find them. Even in destitution, the ghost followed. Other beggars would avoid him, sensing something wrong. "That man's haunted," they would whisper. "Look at him talking to the air, cowering from nothing. Cursed somehow." They left him to his solitary madness. Sakura would see Koheiji everywhere, sitting across from him while he ate discarded rice balls, standing in alleyways watching him sleep, appearing in puddles as a waterlogged reflection. The ghost had transcended physical location. It existed wherever Sakuro's guilty conscience resided, which was everywhere and always. The medical treatments for Otsuka had consumed the equivalent of 5 golden ryo. This seemed fitting to Sakuro in his deteriorating mental state, the exact price of the murder, extracted from the murderers. 5 coins for 5 severed fingers, 5 coins for 2 destroyed lives, but he still owed one more debt, his own life, and Koheiji was in no hurry to collect it. One day, Sakuro saw a priest walking through the market, well-dressed, prosperous-looking, carrying a bag that clinked with donated coins. In his fevered mind, Sakuro became convinced this was the same priest who had performed Otsuka's funeral, the one who had taken his last money. Rage overcame reason. He charged at the priest, screaming accusations, grabbing at his robes. The priest, startled and angry, beat Sakuro severely with his walking staff. Other market-goers joined in, kicking the mad beggar, driving him away from their stalls and shops. Sakuro stumbled through streets, blood streaming from a broken nose, ribs cracked, vision blurred. He collapsed beside a pond in a public garden, body too damaged to continue. The water of the pond was dark and still, reflecting nothing but gray sky. He lay at its edge, breath coming in ragged gasps. Then he felt hands on his shoulders, cold hands, wet hands, hands without fingers, just stumps, pushing him gently but inexorably toward the water. "No," Sakura whispered. "Please, haven't you punished me enough?" The ghost of Koheiji appeared in the water's reflection, face hovering behind Sakuro's. Those flat, dead eyes held no mercy, but perhaps something like satisfaction. The performance was reaching its conclusion. Time for the final act. The handless arms pushed harder. Sakuro's face entered the water, cold and sudden. He tried to pull back but had no strength left. Broken ribs, beaten body, spirit destroyed by months of haunting. The water entered his nose, his mouth, his lungs. He thrashed weakly, the same way Koheiji must have thrashed in Asaka swamp. Felt the same panic, the same burning in his chest, the same terrible understanding that this was the end. Murder coming full circle, water for water, drowning for drowning. But the hands pulled him back at the last moment, drew his head from the water, let him gasp and cough, let him live. This was not how it would end. Not quick, not merciful. Sakuro crawled away from the pond, soaked and shivering. He made it back to the abandoned temple where he'd been sleeping, collapsed in a corner, and fell into fevered delirium. For 3 days he lay there, body racked with infection from the beating, lungs damaged from near drowning. He cried out constantly, having conversations with people who weren't there, reenacting scenes from the murder, begging forgiveness from Koheiji's ghost that stood beside him through every moment of his dying. Neighbors heard the sounds, terrible, haunting sounds of a man losing his final grip on sanity. They didn't investigate. This was Edo. Everyone had their own problems. The mad beggar would die soon enough, and the city would move on. On the third night, Sakuro's cries finally stopped. In the morning, the temple priest found his body, bloated, discolored, skin showing the distinct blue-gray tinge of someone who had drowned. Despite having died on dry land, in the corner of a temple garden, Sakuro looked exactly like a corpse pulled from swamp bottom. The irony would not be lost on those who heard the story later. The man who drowned another had died looking drowned. The man who severed a ghost's fingers had watched his accomplice lose hers. The man who stole 5 golden ryo had spent their exact equivalent on futile medical care. Justice is performance art. Revenge is theater. Every element perfectly balanced and symmetrical. Kohada Koheiji, the actor who had been good at only one thing, had proven himself a master of it. The performance was complete. Or so it seemed. Word of the haunting spread through Edo's theater district like fire through paper screens. The story had everything audiences loved: betrayal, murder, supernatural revenge, tragic irony. Theater people discussed it in tea houses and backstage at Moritaza. Playwrights considered adaptations. Artists sketched scenes of the waterlogged ghost for ukiyo-e prints. The story eventually reached the ears of Ichikawa Danjuro II, the greatest kabuki actor of the age, whose father had been killed by Otsuka's first husband years before. This added yet another layer of tragic connection. Koheiji had married the widow of his idol's murderer, then been murdered in turn by his wife's new lover. The whole tale was like a dark kabuki play, writing itself across multiple generations. Danjuro was known for his powerful spiritual presence, his commanding stage performance, and his respect for the theatrical arts. When he heard of Koheiji's fate, a failed actor who finally succeeded at playing ghosts, then became the most convincing ghost of all, he felt something stir in his chest. Pity, perhaps, or professional respect. One performer recognizing another's dedication to craft, even if that craft transcended death itself. He went to the temple where Sakuro's body had been found, now cleaned and peaceful again. He burned incense and spoke prayers for all the souls involved in the tragedy: Koheiji, Otsuka, Sakuro, even Unpei, somewhere in distant provinces. As Danjuro prayed, the air grew cold. Incense smoke bent in directions that wind alone could not explain. When Danjuro opened his eyes, Koheiji's ghost stood before him. Not the terrifying waterlogged specter that had tormented the murderers. This was a quieter manifestation. Still pale, still wet, still bearing the marks of death, but with something softer in those flat eyes. The ghost looked at Danjuro with what might have been hope, or perhaps need. Danjuro was not afraid. He had performed on stages before thousands, had played demons and gods and supernatural beings. He understood that everything, including death and haunting, was ultimately performance. He met the ghost's gaze and spoke with the same commanding voice that silenced crowded theaters. Kohada Koheiji, I heard of your performance in Osaka. They say you studied death so thoroughly that you became it, that your dedication to craft was absolute, that you perfected the art of playing a ghost until no one could tell where the actor ended and the role began. The ghost said nothing. It never spoke, having died with water in its lungs, but it listened with complete attention. You achieved what every actor dreams of, Danjuro continued. You found the one role you were meant to play, and you performed it better than anyone else could. Your revenge was flawless, symmetrical, inevitable, complete. The precision of a master craftsman. I have played heroes and demons for decades, but I don't know that I've ever performed anything with such perfect dedication. Danjuro paused, then added the words that would finally grant peace to a restless spirit. Koheiji, you were only ever good at being a ghost, but that one thing, you did perfectly. The ghost's flat eyes changed. Something in them loosened. Some tight grip on the world relaxed. For the first time since death, Kohada Koheiji seemed to truly see recognition, not fear or horror or guilt in the eyes of his victims, but genuine acknowledgement from someone who understood. The greatest actor of the age had witnessed his performance and declared it masterful. The ghost bowed, a formal, precise theatrical bow, the kind used to acknowledge applause after a successful show. Then, slowly, like morning mist burning away under sunlight, it faded. The cold left the air. The incense smoke straightened. The presence that had haunted Edo for months simply dissolved, like an actor exiting stage after delivering their final line. Danjuro remained kneeling for a long time after the ghost vanished, thinking about dedication, about art, about the thin line between performance and reality, about how some roles consume their performers so completely that they continue the performance even after the stage goes dark. He commissioned a proper memorial for Koheiji at a respected temple, ensuring the failed actor turned perfect ghost would be remembered not as a victim or villain, but as a performer who achieved mastery of his craft. The stone marker bore a simple inscription: Kohada Koheiji, ghost actor, whose final performance transcended the stage. But the story did not end with Danjuro's recognition or Koheiji's peaceful departure from the mortal realm. Something about the haunting had embedded itself in the theatrical tradition of Edo. The tale was too perfect, too symmetrical, too darkly poetic to simply fade into history. Within a year, the playwright Tsuruya Nanboku IV adapted the story into the kabuki play Iroeri Otogizoshi, Colorful Fairy Tales. The play became wildly popular, audiences thrilling to the tale of betrayal and supernatural revenge. But from its very first performance, cast and crew noticed something unsettling. Accidents plagued productions. Props would fall during the drowning scene. Actors playing Koheiji would suffer mysterious injuries, nothing fatal, but pointed. A sprained wrist during the scene where the corpse grabs Sakuro. Sudden fevers after the performance where Koheiji studies death. Stage makeup that wouldn't wash off completely, leaving actors with a pale, corpse-like pallor for days. The actor playing Koheiji in the premiere production reported waking in the middle of the night feeling cold and wet, as if he'd been submerged in water. His wife claimed to smell swamp rot in their bedroom, though no source could be found. During the final performance of his run, a blue-gray handprint appeared on his costume during the haunting scene. Visible to the entire audience, though no one backstage had touched him with painted hands. The production was a triumph, but the actor never performed the role again. When asked why, he would only say, "Some roles choose their performers. That one has already been cast." Other actors over the decades took on the challenge, drawn by the dramatic power of the role or the promise of acclaim. Each experienced their own version of the curse, strange occurrences during rehearsal, voices heard in empty theaters, the sensation of being watched by flat, dead eyes from dark corners backstage, cold spots on stage that camera equipment later confirmed existed in specific locations, exactly where Koheiji's ghost would stand, according to the script. Modern productions continue to this day, and the curse persists. An actor in the 1920s fell from the stage during a performance, breaking his arm in 5 places, 1 fracture for each severed finger. A production in the 1950s had to be canceled when the actor playing Koheiji collapsed from sudden hypothermia despite the warm theater. In the 1980s, an ambitious young performer took the role despite warnings and spent his entire run experiencing sleep paralysis, waking unable to move, feeling the weight of something cold and wet pressing down on his chest. Theater people whisper that Kohada Koheiji never truly left, that he remains connected to his story, watching each new performance with those flat, dead eyes, judging whether the actor truly understands what it means to be a ghost, that he is jealous of his reputation as the greatest ghost actor, unwilling to let anyone else claim the title he died to earn. Some believe the hauntings are punishment, that Koheiji is angry at having his tragedy turned into entertainment, his pain transformed into art for profit. But others, particularly those who study theatrical tradition, believe something different. They think Koheiji is simply continuing to perfect his craft, that he sees each new production as another opportunity to perform, another chance to refine his art, that the cold spots and strange occurrences are not attacks, but collaborations, the ghost adding authenticity to performances of his own story. After all, what better way for an actor to achieve immortality than to literally perform forever? What greater dedication to craft than haunting your own theatrical legacy across centuries? The temple where Danjuro commissioned Koheiji's memorial still stands in modern Tokyo. The memorial stone has been carefully preserved, protected now by a small shelter and regularly maintained. Visitors come, mostly theater students and performers, leaving offerings of sake, rice, and paper cranes. They pray for successful performances and protection from the jealous ghost. But they also pray for something else, that they might achieve even a fraction of Koheiji's dedication, that they might find the one role they were meant to play and perform it with such completeness that nothing, not rejection, not poverty, not even death itself, could stop them from mastering it. The story of Kohada Koheiji has become a parable within Japanese theater culture. A cautionary tale about betrayal, certainly. A ghost story to frighten and entertain, absolutely. But also something deeper. A meditation on the nature of art, dedication, and what it means to truly embody a role. Theater professors use his story when teaching method acting. Koheiji studied corpses until he became one, they tell students. He didn't just play a ghost. He understood death so completely that death itself recognized him as kin. That is total commitment to craft. That is what it means to lose yourself in performance. The 5 golden ryo that started everything have never been found. Unpei disappeared into rural provinces and was never heard from again, presumably dying somewhere unknown with the cursed coins still in his possession. Or perhaps he spent them, spreading the curse to whoever received them next. Some versions of the story claim those specific coins still circulate through Japan's economy, bringing misfortune to whoever possesses them. 5 golden curses that will continue poisoning lives until the end of time. The swamp where Koheiji drowned has been partially filled and developed over the centuries, but local residents still avoid the remaining water after dark. Fishermen report cold spots in certain areas where their lines consistently tangle or break. Children are warned not to play near the water's edge. Sometimes, on foggy nights, people claim to see a pale figure standing among the reeds, not threatening, just watching, waiting, performing the eternal role of the drowned man returning to the place of his death. The house where Sakuro and Otsuka lived, where Koheiji's ghost appeared night after night in their bed, was torn down decades ago. But the land remained empty for years because no one would build on it. Eventually, modern development pressure overcame superstition, and an apartment building now occupies the site. Tenants in certain units report unexplained cold spots in their bedrooms, the smell of stagnant water with no apparent source, and an uncomfortable feeling of being watched while they sleep. A third presence in the bed, cold and wet and patient. Management dismisses these complaints as imagination or drafts, but tenant turnover in those specific units remains unusually high. Osaka, the rural town where Koheiji achieved his greatest living success, has embraced his memory. A small museum dedicated to his story exists near where the old theater once stood. It displays reproductions of period costumes, explains the kabuki traditions of the era, and tells the complete tale of the ghost actor. Tourist shops sell merchandise, ghost masks, decorative fans featuring Koheiji's likeness, books about the haunting. The museum's centerpiece is a detailed recreation of the drowning scene, complete with atmospheric lighting and sound effects. Visitors can stand on a platform meant to represent the swamp edge and look down at a mannequin of Koheiji sinking into artificial water, his flat eyes staring up at them with eternal accusation. It's morbid, perhaps, but undeniably effective. Museum staff report that the mannequin sometimes appears in different positions than where they left it, turned to face a different direction, or with arms arranged in new gestures. They've checked security footage, but cameras always malfunction during these changes, showing only static or unexplained shadows. The staff have stopped trying to fix it. They simply adjust the mannequin back to its proper position and continue the tours. Some things, they've learned, should not be questioned too deeply. The artistic legacy of Koheiji's story extends beyond kabuki theater. His tale has inspired novels, manga, films, and television dramas. Each adaptation adds new elements while maintaining the core tragedy. The failed actor who finally succeeded, the deadly betrayal, the methodical revenge, the recognition that brought peace. Modern storytellers recognize the archetypal power of the narrative. Dedication rewarded too late, justice delivered through supernatural performance, art transcending mortality. In one popular modern interpretation, a struggling method actor takes the role of Koheiji in a contemporary production, becoming so obsessed with authenticity that he begins experiencing the ghost's presence himself. The line between actor and character blurs until he's uncertain whether he's portraying Koheiji or being possessed by him. The film ends ambiguously. Did the actor go mad from method acting, or did Koheiji's ghost recognize a kindred spirit and merge with him, continuing his eternal performance through a new vessel? The question remains intentionally unanswered, because some mysteries are more powerful when left unresolved. Japanese theater students still study Koheiji's methodology, the way he researched death so thoroughly, practiced so obsessively, committed so completely to understanding his role, that he transcended mere acting. His approach has influenced generations of performers who seek to fully embody their characters rather than simply pretend to be them. Be the role, don't play it, instructors say. Koheiji didn't play a ghost, he became one. That's the difference between adequate performance and mastery. Of course, they also add warnings, but know when to let the role go. Koheiji never did, and look what happened. Art requires dedication, but it also requires boundaries. Otherwise, the performance never ends. Some actors ignore this warning. They pursue roles with Koheiji-like obsession, studying methodology, immersing themselves completely, refusing to break character even off stage. A few achieve remarkable performances. Others lose themselves in the roles, their identities subsumed by the characters they portray. And some, the truly unlucky ones, report feeling haunted by the roles themselves, as if the characters they brought to life have become real enough to watch them from dark corners, to visit them in dreams, to judge whether the performance honored the art or diminished it. The theater world has a phrase for this phenomenon: Koheiji's curse, but it's used half-jokingly, acknowledging the danger while also recognizing that the risk is part of the art. Every performance is a kind of possession. Every actor temporarily dies to themselves and becomes someone else. The only question is whether they can return when the curtain falls. Kohada Koheiji never returned. He gave himself so completely to his role that death itself couldn't end the performance. His ghost became the definitive portrayal of a ghost, so convincing, so thoroughly authentic, that even the great Ichikawa Danjuro II could only acknowledge its perfection. In a strange way, Koheiji achieved what every actor dreams of: immortality through art. His name is remembered centuries after his death. His story is performed again and again, in theaters and on screens, in books and oral traditions. Aspiring performers pray at his memorial, asking for his blessing or perhaps his mercy. His dedication has become legendary, his revenge a cautionary tale, his haunting an eternal part of Japanese theatrical tradition. He wanted recognition. He wanted to be good at something. He wanted audiences to see him and remember him and acknowledge his skill. In the most terrible way imaginable, he got exactly what he wanted. The irony would not be lost on Koheiji himself, that his greatest performances came after death, that he's more famous as a ghost than he ever was as a living actor, that the role he perfected has defined him for eternity. He studied death to portray it authentically. Then death studied him back and decided to cast him permanently in the part. Some nights, in theaters across Japan where his story is performed, stage crew report seeing a figure in the wings, pale and wet, with disheveled hair and flat dead eyes, watching the performance with critical attention. The figure never interferes, never causes disruption during the show. It simply watches, judging whether the actors understand what they're portraying. If the performance is particularly good, if the actor playing Koheiji demonstrates real understanding of dedication, betrayal, and the weight of artistic pursuit, the figure is sometimes seen to nod slightly, a small gesture of approval from the master to the student. Recognition from someone who knows exactly what it costs to perfect a role. And if the performance is poor, if the actor treats the story carelessly or without respect, the cold spots intensify. Props malfunction. The actor finds themselves stumbling over lines they knew perfectly in rehearsal. Costume makeup refuses to wash off completely. Strange sounds echo through empty dressing rooms. The curse manifests not as punishment, exactly, but as critique. Koheiji, even in death, maintains artistic standards. The ghost is jealous of his reputation, protective of his story, unwilling to let careless performers diminish the art he died to perfect. But he also seems to appreciate those who approach the role with proper dedication, as if he recognizes something of himself in actors who study obsessively, who lose sleep perfecting gestures, who understand that great performance requires sacrifice. Perhaps Koheiji haunts his own story not out of anger or revenge, but out of love for the craft. Perhaps he continues performing because that's what actors do. They perform until they can't anymore, and sometimes even after that. Perhaps his ghost appears in theaters not to frighten, but to teach, showing new generations what total commitment to art looks like, even if the lesson comes with a terrible price. Or perhaps he's simply unable to stop. Perhaps the performance became so much a part of him that even death couldn't separate actor from role. Perhaps he's trapped in an eternal loop, forever playing the ghost who seeks justice, forever perfecting the craft that defined and destroyed him, forever demonstrating that some performances are so complete they transcend mortality itself. In the end, maybe it doesn't matter which interpretation is true. What matters is that the story continues, that theaters still stage his tale, that actors still take the risk of portraying him, that audiences still thrill to the dark poetry of betrayal and supernatural revenge, that somewhere in the shadows of those theaters, a pale, waterlogged figure watches and judges and occasionally nods in approval. Kohada Koheiji, the actor who was only ever good at being a ghost, continues his masterwork performance. The curtain never falls. The stage never goes dark. The show, quite literally, must go on. And on certain nights, when the moon is hidden and fog rolls through temple gardens, when theaters are empty and stages are bare, if you listen very carefully you might hear it, that rattling, water-choked laughter. Not threatening, not even entirely unpleasant. Just the sound of an actor who found his calling and refuses to let anything, not even centuries of death, keep him from perfecting his craft. The 5 golden ryo that started it all are still out there somewhere, changing hands, bringing misfortune, connecting past to present through cursed metal. The swamp still holds secrets in its dark water. The memorial stone still receives offerings from hopeful performers. The ghost still watches from theater wings, judging each new interpretation of his tragedy. And somewhere in the eternal darkness where spirits dwell, Kohada Koheiji continues to study his art, to refine his performance, to embody the role that consumed him. Because that's what dedication means. That's what it costs to be truly good at something. That's the price of mastery. He was only ever good at being a ghost. But that one thing, he did perfectly. And he will continue doing it perfectly, night after night, performance after performance, for as long as theaters exist and actors dare to tell his story. The show never ends. The ghost never rests. The art lives forever. And that, perhaps, is exactly what Kohada Koheiji wanted all along.